Great. Well, firstly, Happy New Year. Come on. Happy New Year. It's great to see you all this morning. I had a lovely conversation with Sophie Rees-Smith this morning about all the things that she got up to over Christmas, and then for the rest of the year, the things that she's going to get up to at Easter. Anybody bought mini eggs already? Because they are in the shops already. But Happy New Year. And don't you think the turn of the year is an interesting time in our year, isn't it? It's an interesting time to think about things. It's a natural time to look back at the same time as looking forward. Any of us really contemplative at New Year? Or do you just have a party? Like looking forward to what's going to happen, watch the fireworks. You see, I find that looking back really helps us as we get ready for the coming year. And as we look back, we see all that has happened over the last 12 months. Some things expected. Some things unexpected. Some things joyful. Some things very painful. And whether those are things that we face personally, or things that we face as a church, or things that are happening globally, we can all look back and think, wow, look what 2024 meant for us in our lives today. And as we start 2025, the reality is we don't really know what's going to happen this year. And it actually requires a level of faith for each of us to move in to the coming year and hoping and seeing and trusting that God will be with us and what he might do without knowing fully what that might be. Does anybody else feel that way? What is 2025 going to bring? There are some known things. Maybe over Christmas you booked a holiday. So you know that's going to happen. Hopefully. You see, even the things that we put in the diary, things can change as life happens. And I wonder, have you ever been in a moment where you've had to step out in faith, not knowing how things would pan out? Anybody? I think most of us have, haven't we? We've had to take a step not knowing exactly what was going to happen. For me, it felt a bit like that for the Christmas Day service. Like Grace Church had never had a Christmas Day service before and thought we could book a room and hopefully some people would turn up. Thank you. Thank you for coming. It was a wonderful morning just being together. But that step of faith, not knowing exactly how it would happen, we literally do day after day after day in our lives. We've booked a field near Blackpool Sands over the bank holiday weekend in faith that as a church we'll gather together for a church weekend in August. We've done that as a step of faith, hoping that these things will pan out as we imagine, but probably it will be a bit different than we even imagine. You see, friends, the reality is there are steps of faith in everyday life. You will have taken steps of faith today. And faith isn't just about big life-changing decisions. It's found in those daily choices to trust God. That's what it is. Maybe it's praying for guidance, forgiving someone. We heard that earlier from Beth, and it was brought in the kids' moment. Forgiving someone, giving generously, raising children, carrying out our jobs. What about sharing faith with a friend or a colleague or a neighbour? These things all take faith each and every day. Now, there are some steps of faith that do seem more challenging. Maybe starting a new job, moving to a new place. But each step of faith that we take, whether small or large, reflects our willingness to obey and trust God and live by faith. It's quite simple, really, in its foundation, the truth of it. Now, as a family, this is just a personal story really. As a family, we'll have been in Exeter 2 years in April. But we're here because of a step of faith. At the time, it felt risky, and there were lots of unknowns. But as we think about a year changing, 24 to 25, we now look back on the last almost 2 years of being here, seeing how God used that step of faith to work in our lives and hopefully to be a blessing to others. And actually you look back and you think, oh, that seemed very achievable. But at the time, those steps don't always feel like they're achievable. I'm sure when Peter stepped out of the boat, he was a bit nervous about whether the water would hold him. You see, that's what steps of faith are like. And so today, as Dan has said, we start our series looking at Abraham's story. And over this term, we'll see how his faith challenges and inspires us to trust God, even when the path is unclear. And Abraham's journey reminds us that we are called to live lives of faithful, double L, faithful obedience, and that we are blessed. But not just for ourselves, we are blessed so that we can be a blessing to others. No wonder, have you ever found it hard to trust God? Would anybody fess up to that? I will. It's hard. And I believe the reality for all of us as followers of Jesus is we do want to follow his plans and purposes. Do you know, in our heart, we do. But then something comes up and it's like, oh, really, God? You want me to do that? Or those things are challenging to us. And sometimes the uncertainty, sometimes the risks, sometimes the sacrifices that we might need to make in that step can hold us back. And sometimes we don't always walk into the fullness of what God can do because of fear or worry or anxiety, these things that hold us back. And so that's why a series on faith stirs us both individually but corporately as a group to see what is God taking us, what are we walking into together in this coming year. You see, friends, we love the idea of blessings. But we can sometimes struggle with the idea of stepping into the unknown to receive them. We live in a culture that likes everything laid out on a plate. Feed me. Was that the famous plant in that Little Shop of Horrors? Feed me now. That's our culture. Lay it on the plate for me. But the reality is in life we need to step out into the things that God has for us. We have to step out into just the general day-to-day life. Sometimes getting up and out of bed is a challenge. And we need faith even in those moments. How much easier was it if we didn't have to do those things? We hope that Abraham's story over these few months will resonate with us, because it's a story of faith in the midst of uncertainty. We live in an uncertain world. 10,000 people needing food because of the current situation of the world we live in. Can you imagine that uncertainty week by week, not knowing whether you've got enough food to feed your children? Now we've got brilliant people helping things like Food Bank and other things. But actually, to know full peace and hope, we need to know Jesus in our lives. That's where we get our faith from. And so God called Abraham to leave everything familiar and follow him into the unknown. And friends, life can be like that for us too. Leave everything and follow him into the unknown. We want guarantees, but God instead calls us to trust his promises. And these are the foundations that we want to set in this series of what it looks like to live as faithful followers of Jesus. And as we look ahead in life, it's like God gives us a compass rather than a map. Have you ever thought about that? If you look at life, you think, where are we going? We'd all love a map with the exact directions drawn. But I think more often than not, it feels like God puts a compass in our hands with the rough direction. And you're like, I think we're going to go this way. Oh, no. And it's a bit like that. The interesting thing is when you look back through life, it's often like you then have the map. You say, that's where we went. Oh, there's that valley we went through. There's that mountain that we went over, and that was a really good bit. But in the moment, we've got a compass. That God gives us the general direction. He calls us into something and then takes us on an adventure with him. If it was all laid out and planned and we knew exactly what was going to happen, we knew how much money we were going to have in the bank, what our health was going to be like, all these things, if we knew everything, it wouldn't be much of an adventure. But he's got adventures for us. And so I want to encourage us right at the beginning of the new year. I tried to do it, but I left it too late. I was going to get everybody a compass. I failed. But just imagine, let's start the year with a compass. Let's start the year thinking, Lord, where are you taking me? What's your north for me? Which direction are you going? Where are we going as a church? Which direction are you taking us as a church? And let's live with a compass in our hands, listening out to the Lord as he speaks to us. And so we do feel, as we've prepared and prayed and thought about this series, that this is an important message for the life stage of Grace Church. That God's calling us to stuff. He's calling us to a greater adventure. He's calling us to impact our city in greater ways. He's calling us to new things. And so we want to let that foundation of faith and trusting and obeying the Lord be at the foundation of everything that we do. And just imagine if the story of Grace Church is written a bit like the story of Abraham, what God might do through a bunch of people who live by faith, with lives of faith, in the everyday small things, but also in those big moments that God has for us. So let's explore Abraham's story and see what God wants to teach us about living lives of faith. I've just got the introduction today, the first 9 verses. But let's have a look at this together. Firstly, we see the call of faith. The call of faith on Abraham's life. That Abraham was called to trust in God's promises. And so God called Abraham, to leave his country, his family, and his comfort and go to an unknown land. Genesis 12, verses 1-3 says, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." That sounds like a cool promise that Abraham has been given. He's encountered God, and God says this to him. So firstly, as it's an introduction, who was Abraham? You may not know who Abraham was. Well, firstly, he was called Abram. There was no Aham. It was Abram. We'll find out in the journey that his name is changed for a reason, but I'm not going to steal that from whoever's preaching that one. He was the son of a chap named Terah. He was married to a woman called Sarah, and they came from a place called Ur of the Chaldees. If you want to know, if you're interested in geography, it's a city which is now in southern Iraq, which is the modern day Tel El Makaya. Forgive the pronunciation. You can Google it. But it's a place that exists. It's a place that exists. And we also know that before he met the Lord, Abraham worshipped other gods. We read this in Joshua chapter 24. And this is important that we realize this because it shows us that the call of faith is for everyone, not just God's people. God calls people out of their own places, their own worlds, their own religions, into his family and into his purposes and into his promises, whether people know God or not, he can still call them to live lives of faith. And that's about it. That's what we know about Abraham. We don't hear of Abraham doing much in chapter 11, either good or bad. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, it seems comes the most monumental promises ever spoken by God anywhere in the scriptures. It's like, up pops Abraham, then speaks God, and gives him this massive promise about being a blessing to the nations and all of this. And it wasn't grounded in anything that Abraham had done or would do. This promise, these words from God, were simply came by the initiative of God himself. God decided one day that Abraham. Does anybody ever feel like that? You think, God, you chose me? You know me? You know my thoughts? You know the things that... But God decided Abraham. But God decided you. The initiative of God, friends. We need to remember that as we walk out in faith, we are following God's initiative and his call upon our lives. And what does Abraham do? I love this. Boys, I think you're going out. What does Abraham do? Anyone? I don't know if I put it in my notes. No? Good. Abraham obeys. God speaks, and Abraham obeys. He trusted God's promises even without knowing the details. That's bold. That's courageous. Some might say foolish. But Abraham responded and trusted God. I love how Hebrews 11, verse 8, reflects on this moment. The writer to the Hebrews, in Hebrews 11, it's like this big picture of the heroes of faith in the Old Testament, and it starts by faith and introduces a load of people. And this is what it says about Abraham. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. That's why Abraham is remembered as a man of faith, because he went going, not knowing. He went even though he didn't know what it would look like. He didn't know what the journey would look like. He had a compass. Sort of went in the general direction. Got a load of things right, got a load of things wrong. And that's how it started. I remember teaching the boys to swim, trying to. And at those moments when they stood, as any parents might have done this, you stand on the edge of the pool, and you're like, go on, you can do it. I've got you. And then they go, they've probably got armbands on at that moment because they're quite young. And they go, whoosh, and you catch them. You catch them. At first they were hesitant, but then they saw that I was there, ready to catch them as they took a leap. And they took the leap not because they were sure of the outcome, but rather they had already experienced my trustworthiness and faithfulness as a dad, so they jumped. Like Abraham, we go not knowing exactly what the future will hold, but Abraham's leap of faith was much the same. He lived by faith because he trusted God. He went because he trusted the Lord. You see, faith isn't blind. It's faith that's based on the fact that the outcome is sure, because it rests on the certainty of who God is. Do you understand that? Faith isn't certain because of what we do. It's certain because of who God is. And that he's good, and he's a loving father, and he's got plans and purposes, and he's promised a bunch of stuff to us. And we walk into that goodness. Faith isn't something we just have, friends. It's not just a nice, I feel faith. It's something we act upon. It's something we do. It's an active thing. Stepping out in faith, as Peter stepped out of the boat. It wouldn't have been faith if he stayed in the boat. It would have been something else. And so, friends, faith often requires stepping into the unknown. Maybe God is calling you, even in the turn of this year, to make and take a bold step. It's how we felt a few years ago. It's a bold step. many people here who have moved into this area because you had faith and took a step of faith into something. Moving a family, moving a job, moving to go to university, loads of stuff. Maybe God's calling you to something, starting a new venture. Maybe it's calling you to share your faith more with people, and that's quite nerve-wracking. Or maybe he's calling you to trust him with a difficult decision, something that's going on in life. Friends, like Abraham, we don't need to see the whole picture to trust that God does. He knows it all. He knows the beginning from the end. He promises to carry all things through to completion. Secondly, we see that Abraham was blessed to be a blessing. And he's got a purpose for us in being part of his family. It's not just about gathering as a little group and blessing each other, but we're blessed to see others around us, those who don't know the Lord, be blessed. I think a perfect example this morning when we think about the food bank. People giving 100 tons of food for free to bless others. You see, you don't need to even follow Jesus to be a blessing to others. It's God sort of built it into humanity. But we have got a purpose, and we've also got more than food to share. We have the bread of heaven. We have Jesus to share. He's got a mission for us. As we are blessed by him, we get to bless others with lives of faith because of who Jesus is in us, and we get to share him with them. God didn't bless Abraham just for his own benefit. He said, all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. And so we see God initiates. He pours out grace upon Abraham, who didn't deserve to be called, chosen, just a chap from Ur. He blesses him, and then he articulates this central truth of faith. God's blessings flow through us to others. We're blessed to be a blessing. We're blessed to be a blessing. We have much so we can give much. It's part of who God calls his people to be. That it's the church that speaks up. It's the church that helps. It's the church that serves. It's the church that brings the love of God to the world around us that needs it, because we have been blessed so much. Just think about a river. The river's running quite wide at the moment because of all the rain. But when a river flows freely, it brings life to everything around it, doesn't it? But we were driving along, where were we driving? And a branch had fallen across a river, and then all of the debris was all caught up around it and started to block and change the sort of the route of where the flow of the river was going. And it can be the same in our lives when we're flowing freely and blessing, but then things block us, and then the water can become stagnant and stale, can't it? You see a river doing that. And so God's blessings in our lives are like a river. We're meant to bring life and hope to others. Let's not let things block what we can do as we serve those around us. You see, the unique call of Abraham was that God would start a nation with him. That's amazing. He will start a nation. What does it say? It says, I will make you into a great nation. This is a guy who's left his dad in Ur, and he's wandering to this promised land that God has sort of said, you're going to go and you're going to be a great nation. You're thinking, is me, my wife we've not got any kids. What? And God calls that out of Abraham and calls him to be this unique calling to be a great nation. But the New Testament tells us that we are Abraham's descendants. We're Abraham's seed. And in that sense, friends, we're called to be a blessing too. Because we're in the line. That line of blessing, that line of being blessed. That people of God that have taken this message of hope and of faith to those around us. And so how can we be a blessing to others? We've heard one example this morning. Maybe it's using our resources to help someone in need. I loved it when a message came around on the Grace Church community WhatsApp the other day for a couple who've just had a baby, I think. And they used to be in Grace Church, moved away, have come back. And Kez says, this family are our friends. Could we make them some meals? And the number of thumbs up on that message, which is a yes, basically, was like, isn't this exciting? Isn't this wonderful that this isn't just about blessing people who are part of us. It's about blessing friends. It's about blessing people further afield. Or when Liz and Susie were there and the lady who broke her leg in Ludwell Valley Park, who doesn't even go to church, wasn't a Christian, and people in Grace Church made her some meals. Because we're blessed to be a blessing. Another way we can be a blessing is to work hard in our jobs. God's given us skills and abilities, and we get to work as if to God and be a blessing in our workplaces. We get the opportunity to share the good news of Jesus with our friends and families. Or serve, get stuck in and seeing what God is doing in this city or in this church as we look to be a blessing to others. Friends, when we see ourselves as a channel of God's blessing, our lives take on a very different meaning, and they take on eternal significance because of the conversations that we might have, the blessing that we bring to others with no strings but just love can change people's perspective of who God is because they see him in us. What a privilege we have. The next part we see from Abraham, it says the journey of faith. It's about trusting God through uncertainty. Verse 4, so Abraham, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Lot was his nephew. Abraham was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan. And they arrived there. Abraham travelled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At the time the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he went towards the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Then Abraham set out and continued towards the Negev. Friends, Abraham's journey wasn't easy. Some of us go camping now and again, but we know it's coming to an end. Abraham's life was lived in tents, permanently, place to place, moving through the place. He faced challenges, many challenges that they faced through those times, some of which brought out the best in him and Sarah. You'll see next week, there's a great story about him pretending Sarah was his sister or something, and all sorts. It was like, really? But we learn a lot about Abraham and faith through these stories. While at other points, they made a real mess of things. And they didn't actually see all of God's promises fulfilled in their lifetime. I will make you a great nation. Abraham didn't see that. He didn't see that his descendants would number the stars in the sky. But he still went. He went not knowing what would be fulfilled, but he went knowing that God had said, and so he trusted that it would. The writer to the Hebrews again reminds us, by faith he made his home in the promised land like a stranger, for he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. He went knowing that God was building something, and he was going to use him. What an amazing thing to do. The commentator Derek Kidner writes, the call of God was not only a test of faith, but a demonstration of God's ability to accomplish his purposes through the unlikely and the unprepared. Phew. We're okay. We're okay, Grace Church. We're probably all unlikely, and mostly all of us are unprepared. I'm certainly unprepared. But God. We see in the first words in the Bible, in the beginning, God. Friends, but God. We're unlikely, unprepared, but God can do amazing things through us. This reminds us that God's faithfulness is not dependent on our qualifications, but on his character. This is the one we follow, friends. And so as we start this year, whether things are going well, maybe things are painful and there's challenge and there's a time of uncertainty and life's just noisy and hard. Let's trust that God's promises are worth the wait. Let's trust that God's promises are worth getting through, sometimes by the tips of our fingers, the things that are happening. Let's not settle for earthly comforts, but let's live with the hope of eternity in our heart, knowing that God is faithful. Let's remember he's given promises to us. I will never leave you or forsake you. Thank you, Lord. Does anybody ever need to be reminded of that? I'll remind you today. God says he will never leave you or forsake you. Jesus said, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. That's a promise for us. Jesus is with us. In the uncertainties and the challenges of life, he's with us. And his promises are yes, and I agree. Yes and amen. Yes and yes. His promises are good, and he's trustworthy to fulfill and keep his promises. And then finally, we see from this little chunk of scripture the God of faithfulness. We see a God of faithfulness whose character we can trust. You see, remember that Abraham's faith wasn't rooted in his own ability, but God's character. And as we start the year, I just want to say, let's just take that in for a moment. Because I think sometimes we can so easily decide in our own head that God's faithfulness is determined by how faithful we are, how hard we work, or how good we are, how well we're performing. It's just not true. His faithfulness is to do with who he is, not who we are. Let's break that lie at the beginning of the year, friends. Because it changes everything. It changes our mindsets. It changes our thought patterns for particularly when things are going badly. Because let's be honest, stuff goes wrong in life and it's pretty messed up sometimes. And our first thought is, why would God want to help me? You're exactly the person that God wants to help because you've got nothing. Let's break that lie that our own ability has anything to do with God's faithfulness. And as we do that, we get to be faithful and live lives of faith, knowing that he loves us. It does mean that we do want to serve him. We do want to honor him. We do want to be holy, live holy lives. We want to run away from sin and these things. But we know that he loves us and he's for us in these moments. God promised, I will make you into a great nation and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. When God called Abraham, he didn't just give him instructions, he gave him promises, as we've said. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you. And God's promises were fulfilled in surprising ways. And Abraham didn't even get to see them. Sometimes we won't get to see the fulfillment of the promises God speaks over our lives. That's okay. Because God will fulfill them. Because he said he will. As we'll see, Abraham and Sarah had to wait decades for the birth of Isaac. The son through whom the promise would continue. I will make you a great nation. Your descendants will number the stars in the sky. They had no children. And it wasn't like the promise came and then next week Sarah fell pregnant. They had to wait years for that promise to come to fulfillment. And that was one son. In that moment, that's not stars in the sky number, is it? Yet God kept his word, and ultimately the promise to bless all nations wasn't fulfilled in Abraham. It was fulfilled in Jesus Christ, a descendant of Abraham, who brings salvation to the world and who offers himself to us today. And he is received how? By faith. By faith. Life isn't always straightforward, friends. It's challenging. As we look back through last year, we'll have gone through things that were challenging. Some of us are like, I'm glad we're in a new year now. But also we're a bit nervous what this year might bring, because life is challenging. We live in a broken and fallen world. But friends, we can look back, can't we, at God's faithfulness, time and time again? We can, both in our own lives and in Scripture. And so just as we look back at 2024, knowing that through the ups and downs the Lord has been with us, and we have much to thank him for, we look forward into 2025, knowing that he is unchanging, that he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And we can trust him. So what does Abraham's story teach us about the life of faith? Here are some key truths. They're going to come up on the screen, I think. Firstly, faith requires stepping out in obedience, even when we don't have the answers. Secondly, faith calls us to live as pilgrims, with our hope fixed on eternal promises. You see, there's a place that God has set for us in eternity with him. That's our ultimate home. But while we're here, we get to be a blessing to those around us, just as we've been blessed by him. And thirdly, faith rests on the character of a faithful God who always keeps his word. Doesn't rest on how good we are or clever we are. And so what step of faith is God calling you to take today? Is it a small act of obedience or a bold leap into the unknown? Like Abraham, you don't need to have all the answers. You just need to trust the one who does. Can you imagine what it would look like if we all lived with Abraham-like faith? Just a little bit of Abraham-like faith. What would this look like if we heard God speak and acted on it? If we trusted him through it all? What an example we'd be to those around us. What a blessing would be to those around us. What a life of adventure that would be. What if we saw every blessing as an opportunity to bless others? That would be fun. Friends, together we could make a profound impact on our families, our communities, this city, and the world for God's glory by taking daily steps of faith into what he has for us. And so as we spend time looking at the life of Abraham this term, our prayer is that we will enjoy the adventure of faith as individuals, as a church. There'll be some stuff that God will call us into, that we step into with faith, trusting that he's with us. Let's do this as a church. Let's step into that future that he has for us, full of faith, trusting that he's got us and he's seeking us to follow him on his adventure for us. And I'll encourage us, let's get out our compasses, but let's commit ourselves, each of us individually, as families and as in a church, to live as people of faith and blessing, trusting God's promises and sharing his love with those around us. That's what he's calling us to do, friends. That's what it is to be a follower of Jesus, as he calls us into his plans and purposes. And that's what we want to do this year as Grace Church, as families, as we serve this city, as we serve the Southwest, as we serve each other, as we serve the poor and the needy and the hungry and the hurting. He's calling us on this adventure together. Our response is whether we commit to joining him on his adventure.